Welcome back to the Root Institute. Today we have one of the reasons why, I hate calling myself an activist. I think now whenever someone is introduced, they say a writer or a performer, and then they just tag activists on there. But one of the reasons I don't do that is because of people like who we're having today, Monifa Bandele and Brittany Packnett-Cunningham, are actual activists who have dedicated their lives to some of the issues that plague our society, whether it is social justice, criminal justice reform, equity, with moms rising. So we're talking about medical justice and medical equity too. So these are the people who are out there doing the work, and I'm just a dude who writes about people like these. And so today we're going to be talking about three issues that kind of fall under the overall umbrella of criminal justice reform. That is, defund, abolish, or just reform the police, prisons, and the entire criminal justice system. And usually when we talk about these subjects, the first thing we talk about is what's wrong with those. But I think that is a backwards way of addressing these issues. So first, I'd like to ask Brittany, do you think what the way we do things, if we, like police, for instance, and prisons, and even criminal justice in overall, does it work the way we are doing it, right? We're not talking about, even aside from the human rights violations and the inequities and inequalities, but does it work at its core? Does it solve crime? Does it reduce crime? Does it keep us safer?
The very short answer, the very clear answer is no, right? That we have not actually seen this criminal legal system, from policing to jailing to the court system to imprisonment and mass incarceration, do the thing that it was promised to do, which is keep communities safer, solve and reduce crime. I mean, from the most basic standpoint, police come after a crime has been committed, right? So the idea that we consistently funnel money into something that has been proven not to even functionally prevent the thing that it's supposed to be preventing doesn't actually make any sense. Then when you actually look at the data, you look at whether or not there has been crime prevented, reduced, or solved, especially in marginalized communities, the answer overwhelmingly is no. Then you continue to tease that thing out, and you look at all the folks who are sitting in jail, not prison, but jail right now, for pre-trial detention, simply because they cannot afford the cash bail system that this country has. Are we being kept safer because our loved ones who are supposed to be getting due process under some kind of criminal legal system are sitting in jail because they can't afford $500, $10,000, $25? No, we are not demonstrably safer. Then when you actually look at the data about whether or not jails and then further prisons are keeping us safe and actually reducing crime, especially compared to a lot of the community services that we know do work, the answer once again is no. So if the stated project of policing and the criminal legal system in America is to keep communities safe, to reduce crime, to solve crime, and to prevent crime, this criminal legal system fails every single time. But if the stated goal of the criminal legal system in America is to increase profits for certain communities of people, to decrease autonomy for other communities of people, and to keep folks that look like you and I under control, then frankly, the criminal legal system is doing quite well. So we actually need to be looking at why this system was designed. It is working exactly as it was designed to do so, but that design was never about actually keeping everybody safe and reducing crime, because there are far better ways to do that involve investing in our most marginalized communities, and that's not what we're doing.
Monifa, you've been involved with this work from a grassroots perspective with Moms Rising, but you've also been involved with policy issues and writing and imagining new policies and ways to change this. So could you talk about the specific policies and why this system doesn't work, and expand on what Brittany just said?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Brittany nailed it. These interventions they aren't just ineffective in making our community safe. They actually actively make our communities less safe, less healthy, more violent, right? Because at the root of violence, at the root of all of the health disparities that we have are trauma, right? And what is when we sit down and we talk to people and say, what's the trauma? It's family separation, right? That's mass incarceration. What's the trauma? It's violence by policing, stop and frisk, which we fought so long here in New York City. So really at the core, not only are we talking about a system that doesn't get the fake goal, like Brittany pointed out, of making us safe, that doesn't happen. It actively makes our communities less stable. And when you have a destabilized community economically, health-wise, housing, all of those pieces, then it becomes a violent place. It becomes a place that is not safe for our families. And so how does this connect to the policies? Well, you absolutely have to experience what's happening in our communities in order to design the solutions to make our communities safe. Because if not, you're going to miss the mark every time. We know because we've been through all of the different demands. We used to demand some things 20 years ago and 10 years ago that right now we're like, we have lived the experiences that help us to know what we need. And mothers, family members, fathers need to also be a part of that design process. So I step into this because of stories like what happened to Muhammad Ba here in New York City, right? 9 years ago, Muhammad Ba's mother picked up the phone to call for an ambulance because he was having an emotional health crisis. He needed care. He needed a doctor, a therapist, a nurse, anything. But instead, the only thing people in our community have access to when we call 911 were police. And the police showed up and they killed Muhammad. And so as a community of folks who've been working for a decade already, since Amadou Diallo is talking about reform the police, we were like, no, we don't need them in these situations at all.
Brittany, 7 years ago, it was funny that today, how your phone says, like, these are the photos from 7 years ago or from 5 years ago that happened on this day. And my phone popped up with like a bunch of pictures from Ferguson from 7 years ago. And I was like, wow, it doesn't seem like it was 7 years. But one of the things that Ferguson showed us, when we zoomed out and actually looked at what was going on in Ferguson, was that the way that community and that criminal justice system in that community and the court system and the policing system was structured, not only did it target a specific community and feed that specific community with fines and by just basically extracting them from Black people, but it didn't work. Like, it wasn't reducing crime. But one of the things I'm interested in, and I know you can't speak for everyone, is why do we have so much trust in what Monifa called the hammer, right? If we keep using the hammer, why do we just have so much trust? Like, if we get rid of the police, there's going to be the purge and everybody's going to be shooting through our windows. Why do we believe this disinformation about the police?
One of the things that oppression and marginalization does so well is it robs us of our imagination. So it stifles our world in such a way where it limits our ability to consider the alternatives. So if this is all we have ever seen, if all we've ever experienced consistently is over-policing, under-resourcing, a constant revolving door of the criminal legal system with our friends and our loved ones, when that is all we are used to seeing, it can be more difficult to extend past what we know into what we have never experienced before, right? This is why practices like Black radical futurism and Afrofuturism are so important, because they help us build the muscle of imagination. They help us build the muscle of saying, I've never seen it done that way, but that doesn't mean it can't be done that way. I'll never forget during the Ferguson uprising, I used to run an education organization back home. St. Louis is my hometown. I grew up 15 minutes away from Ferguson in another one of those tiny municipalities with its own police department. And those folks would use and abuse us all the time. But I was talking to a school principal, and he was a principal in the school district that Michael Brown Jr. had graduated from. And he said to me, I really want to get police officers out of our school. I want school resource officers gone. I want police officers not to be the people on the other end of the phone if one of our students is experiencing some kind of crisis. I want to create a different system. And the first people that he went to do that with, rightfully so, were students and their parents. And some of the first pushback he got on taking officers out of the school were parents. Not because they didn't love their children, not because they didn't understand fully the cradle to prison pipeline that so many of our children are caught in, but because they literally had not seen it a different way. And they're asking a fundamental righteous question. How are our young people going to stay safe if there are no police? So we need to make sure we have an answer to that question. Mariame Kaba says all the time that abolition is about what we create. It's not just about what we tear down and what we take away. It's about, to Monifa's point, it's about making the investments in community systems and structures that uphold people and keep them healthy and well in the first place. And it's about making sure that if there is a safety issue, that the right people are on the other side of the line and that the right kind of programming is actually there to help folks.
You know, when you asked, why do people think it's going to be the purge? It's because of the purge. You know, like that collective imagination that we actually do have is constantly under attack. You know, there was a time during our parents' era in the 60s and 70s where they were talking about this issue about what the police really were in our communities. And you had artists like Emory Douglas who created cartoons in the Black Panther newspaper that helped people to really get this invest, divest model. And right around that time, 50 years ago, then you see a huge influx of Hollywood, high budget films, series, all this, what people today call propaganda. So I just wanted to add that, yeah, in addition to how we're stifled, our imagination is stifled because of our trauma, there's actually billions of dollars pumped into attacking our imagination so that all we think of is the purge, law and order, cops, criminal minds, SVU, the whole nine.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a study that shows that police officers and police in general, law enforcement, is the most overrepresented profession on TV. Like, just think about, like,
That's right.
aside from doctor shows and legal shows, like, just think about how many police. It's a genre of entertainment. They're not like nurse shows, or they're not a bunch of teacher shows, or
Therapists.
shows, people
Right.
factory worker shows. But like, you could just turn on the TV at any time and see a police show. So it's ingrained in us that is what
Yeah.
keeps us safer, and it's ingrained in us that, first of all, it's ingrained in us that their job is dangerous, so they need guns, which is like a topic that we could dive into for an hour itself, right? Like how dangerous policing is versus the reality of it's not as dangerous as people who work in factories or people who drive dump trucks, right? Literally, logging is a more dangerous job than police officers, but for some reason, we fantasize them as heroes. And Monifa, that's one of the things that I wanted to ask you, because you know your work again in policy and with mothers, and Brittany, you too, is that one of the pushbacks we see. You know, we like to say, well, you know, the government and white people, but one of the biggest obstacles is the generations who believe this in Black communities say, like, we need these police officers to protect us too. And so how do we, I think people like us, and especially people like you who are really, really young, they say that your progressive ideas, won't keep communities safe, and we need police, and we need these, these throwback institutions to keep us safe. And how do we address that issue? Not just, the government and the white people who live in some safe communities, but the people who live in our communities who don't believe that they can be kept safe without these institutions.
Yeah, you talked about, Brittany talked about the Afrofuturism. We have to unlock that collective imagination, and that means speaking directly to our people. Just like our policies need to be designed directly for our communities, when we are having these discussions and we are ironing out what the policies need to be, we have to talk directly to our folks. And so one of the things that we do, and I know they do it also in St. Louis, because I think the workshop is modeled that we do in Brooklyn after what was done on the ground there. But we tell people, okay, close your eyes and imagine a time when you felt safe, the most safest feeling. It smells a certain way, it looks a certain way, somebody is around you. There's a whole feeling to it. It tastes a certain way. Now open your eyes and tell us who's there. Are you in a precinct? Are there police nearby? Did you just walk through a metal detector? No. There's these things about green spaces, or just being at your grandma's house, or being able to have a home cooked meal, stable housing. These are the things that make you feel safe. And when you map that for folks, and I know it's tedious, but we got to do this. This is why you have to have grassroots organizing. We have to be on the ground, talking to people in groups, in their buildings, on their blocks, because people have the answers.
This is a critical point that Monifa makes about prioritizing people over efficiency, right? So Western ideals try to teach us that everything that is important has to move fast. And we have to recognize that people are in crisis right now. So do we have to have urgency? Absolutely. But I would much rather measure 10 times and cut once than have to cut 10 times and keep going back to the forest for new wood, right? So we actually have to recognize, to her point, that the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And that when you give them the space and time to do the kind of collective imagination work that we are perfectly capable of, we can and will come up with solutions that are not just efficient, but that are ultimately sufficient. So we don't have to keep coming back and revisiting the same problem over and over again. When I joined the Ferguson Commission, it was not because the governor wanted me to. In fact, I've never talked about this, but I never smiled in the pictures with the governor that he would take, because I never wanted them to publish them, because I didn't want you to think that I did not want him to think that I was here for him, right? He completely bungled his response to what our community needed. I was there for two reasons. One, because Reverend Starsky Wilson, who now runs the Children's Defense Fund, was the co-chair of this. And we had a lot of conversations about how we refused to make this the Kerner Commission 2.0, about how this was not just going to be another riot commission that was quick and put together a report at the expense of the people to quiet the uprising, right? An uprising that we were both members of. The other reason was because we sat with our comrades and our compatriots from the streets, and we said, the second that somebody tries to maneuver this for their own purposes, and we are unable to do what we need to do for the people through this function, you have a promise for me and four other folks on the commission who were also part of the uprisings that we will walk. And so that kind of community engagement, that kind of true grassroots, deep relational power building has to come with the level of recognition that the power always belongs to the people.
So I would like to, engage in an exercise where we kind of imagine what those pillars in our community would look like. First of all, policing, right? Because that's the kind of the front door to the criminal justice system, right? So if, let's not even use the incendiary phrase abolish or defund the police. If we were to imagine a police force or a group of people who were committed to who are hired and committed to keep our community safe, what would that look like to you, Monifa?
Well, first, I want to say that when we talk about policing and the police, we're not just talking about the police force and cops on the street. We have to understand that this country, since we were brought here, has had a fetish around policing Black bodies. And so it happens everywhere. It happens in schools. People, kids are policed by their teachers and administrators. We're in the hospitals. We're policed in those hospitals. This is one of the reasons why Black women have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in this country. And housing, when we're looking for apartments. So there's actually an obsession with controlling and policing. I mean, surveilling, controlling, intruding on Black bodies. And so when we talk about abolishing policing, it's not just the precinct on the corner that I wish would be a birthing center instead. It's really about what we experience throughout every aspect of our day-to-day lives. You know, that ride that Brittany talked about on the way to school, right? It wasn't just the police were stopping on the corner, but every interaction that you had with the state system, if you were Black, was a policing event. You know, so we're talking about really drastically changing how we interact with the power structures, right? So then when we talk about what do systems of safety and health look like, well, they look for us the same way they look for everybody else, right? It means that for me, and we've actually had these conversations in our community, 2 women just this past 2 years have died at my hospital closest to me, Woodhull Hospital, just giving birth. 2 young Black women, you know, no outstanding health issues, nothing like that, something that people do day in and day out. But meanwhile, I've got hundreds of police officers at the corner. We need a birthing center. A birthing center looks like safety for me. We need housing. Housing looks like safety to me. We don't actually need a person who is assigned to police us if we have systems that are designed to keep us safe and healthy.
So if we imagine those systems, right, Brittany, because I confess that Monifa answered that in exactly the way that I wanted her to answer that, because like as you talked about this, the police stopping traffic, right? You know, to me it is insane that our traffic safety system is like we'll just let the dudes with the guns handle traffic. We'll let the dudes with the guns handle our homeless problem. We'll let the dudes with the guns handle our mental health issue, right? But that's what we do. So the question is, if not defund, if not about, like, how do you create those systems without the money? Because like it's only a finite amount of money, right? So where do you get that money from? Well, how about the people with the guns who were not experts in traffic and who are not experts
Hello.
in mental health and who are not expert in housing, right?
Right.
So if not for if not changing that system to create a system again as we started that works, right? Where do we get these resources from that we have just poured into policing?
Yeah, I mean, this is a critical question, right? Because the answer is that's where the money is. It's in policing, it's in the American criminal legal system, and it's in our military system. Let's never forget that when this pandemic hit the globe, um, Congress found a way to cut checks and send money to business owners, to corporate America. We saw a whole lot of people getting PPP loans when they could only manage to get a couple of stacks to everyday people who couldn't afford their bills and who were losing their jobs, right? So, every time we ask the government for something and they say, where are we going to get the money? Remember 2020, right? Remember all of the already wealthy people who became more wealthy because of money the government somehow figured out how to print. So that's number one. But number two, to your point, these are some incredibly bloated budgets. And if I'm going to take a financial look at it alone, right? If I'm going to leave all of the other factors out of it and just look at the money, please tell me what other industry can do this piss poor a job at their stated goal and keep getting more money every single year? If you have somebody working for you, because let's be clear, these folks work for us. It is our tax dollars that pay their salaries, and it is our citizenship from which they derive their authority. If you had somebody working for you who would halfway do the job, who would come in and phone it in half the time, who would say something happened, oh, I really don't care about that thing. I'm really not going to answer the call for another hour or two. And who, worse yet, when they came on the job, caused you more harm, caused you more headache, caused you more violence, created more expense for you. Would you hire that person? Would you promote them? Would you give them a raise? Would you keep them around? Absolutely not. But that's what we keep doing with police forces and the military every single year in this country. We keep giving them more money to do a bad job at the thing we were told they were supposed to do. Again, it's because they're not actually here to keep us safe.
So if we look at it from this perspective, we took all of these things into consideration, how do we convince people that, we can tell them, look, this thing is not working. We can show them that this, what fuels crime and what keeps us not safe. But how do we convince people that we need to take the resources that we put into this thing that's not working, and reimagine it from the start, right? So if we combine all of these things that we're talking about, the imagination, the data that we use, the knowledge that we've gained from just working on the ground in these communities, but how do we ultimately convince people and show people that there is a better way if we reimagine this from the start, with the eye on actually doing the thing that these institutions exist to do?
We have to demonstrate it. That's how we convince people. They have to see it. And everyone can start. You can do it with just on your block. Most of our major cities now have, some of them call them violence interrupter programs. Some are community anti-violence programs. Go and invest in them. Volunteer. We have to show our neighbors and families that we can keep us safe, right? They have to believe in that. They have to trust in that. But I want to say that we're winning. That's why you see this increase in coverage of crime.
One of the things that she just pointed out, Monifa just pointed out, is that we're not going to see a momentous shift overnight, right? Like, it's not going to happen overnight. But the reason that people take to the streets, the reason that people are on the ground, is because we have to know that at some point this is going to be a little bit incremental. But what are the areas, right? Like, we're talking about policy, we're seeing the Justice and Policing Act in Congress, but what are some actions that people can take on the ground in their day-to-day lives to kind of shift this focus away from police?
So this is a powerful question, and I want to continue on what Monifa said, because it really truly is about being engaged every day, all the time, right where you are. I think that a lot of the hype that we have seen over the last 7 years, in particular around social justice, around activism, like you said, everybody wants to call themselves an activist or an organizer now, whether or not they've done the work, totally different conversation. But ultimately, a lot of the hype has led people to see a particular archetype, that you have to be a national figure or a statewide figure, that you have to be yelling in the street, that you have to have been arrested for your cause, that you have to have gone on a hunger strike or been on the news or whatever. I want us to dismiss that archetype and to recognize that protest is really just about telling the truth out loud in public, and activism is about being active. And those are two things that we can do all the time. And in fact, where we are right now needs us to go and perform those actions with consistency. Your block, your zip code, your county, your city, all of those things. So what does that look like? That means engaging with local grassroots organizations. Do you know who the folks are that are on the ground taking care of the issues that you care about? Whether it's environmental racism, gun violence, policing, whatever it is, do you know who those people or organizations are? Often they'll have an Instagram page, a Facebook account, and a website that you can log on to and learn more. Find out when the next meeting is. Find out when the next call is. Read the information pamphlets, because those places depend on all of us to commit our time, talent, and treasure, right? The second thing is to remain an engaged citizen. I think that it is a mistake for us to dismiss the importance of electoral politics. Every time we're talking about policy, those things are crafted and passed by people who were elected or appointed to some kind of political office. It's your zoning commission. It's the people who sit on your fire and police board. It's your council people. It's your alder people. It's your mayor. It's your sheriff. It's your DA. It's your county attorney. It's your circuit attorney. It's your congressperson. It's your governor. It's your state reps. It's your state senators. It's your fire chief. It's your police chief. It's your president. It's your senators. It's all of those people who are consistently making decisions that affect us every day. And it's the people that they appoint to run the State Department, to run the Department of Justice, to run your State Department of Education, to run your mental health services in your county. All of those people are government officials, and we need to all act like they work for us, because they do. So just like you would with an employee, and you check in with them every quarter, every month to see what the progress is looking like, to figure out if they're making their goals, we need to be doing the same thing with the folks who make decisions in our name. There should be nothing ever decided about us without us. That should be tattooed on our forehead, and every single morning we wake up, we need to look at that in the mirror and figure out, how am I going to involve and insert myself in my own democratic in my own democratic space today? How am I going to involve and insert myself in the decisions that are being made about me, my body, my family, my community, my children, my elders? So yes, that means voting every single time, right? But it also means running. If you're tired of the folks who are on the ballot and you want to make sure that there's some righteous representation that we got in there, then consider whether or not you need to run for office yourself. And then after you voted or after you've run for office, keep checking in with those folks. Show up at those school board meetings. Show up at those city council meetings, because there are folks writing budgets and we don't even know what's in them. There are folks making appointments and we don't even know who's getting appointed or what their history is. And there are folks who depend on us being not involved with that. There are entire GOP-run state legislatures right now that are trying to make sure that our votes are suppressed, and they depend on the fact that we do not know their names and we never show up at their offices. And if that vote was not powerful and important, there would not be people working so damn hard to take it away from us. I'm not going to sit here and say that voting is the silver bullet or the single answer, because we all know it's not. If it was, we'd be free by now. But we do have to recognize that engaged citizenship means continued engagement with, yes, the protest that's happening on the street, but the policy and politics that take our street energy and actually turn them into real decisions. So all of those things have to work together, and we have to be engaged locally. We have to start right where we are, and we have to stay so engaged and involved that they get tired of seeing us coming. They need to be like, oh God, here she comes again. I know she coming with a million questions. I know she's gonna have a whole lot to say on the open mic session. Like, we need to be oppression's worst enemy. They need to shudder when they see us coming. They need to be so shook when we walk in the room, because they know we are not going to stop being engaged until this thing gets right.
And I just want to quickly jump. Can I give one quick example? Because one of the most powerful examples of activism that I saw last summer came from people who probably would not consider themselves to be activists. I mean, people know in the streets, the conservative estimates are 26 million people took to the streets last summer on this issue. That's unprecedented, right? And at the same time, it was like we were in a war zone. We had police descending on our protests, outfitted like they could land on the moon. We had nurses in hospitals, though, that were wearing garbage bags because they didn't have PPE to protect themselves from a deadly virus. So we are in these streets, whether it is St. Louis or Brooklyn or Minneapolis or Oakland, and we felt like we're in a war zone, right? We felt like activists. We're standing in our power. We're fighting back. And the police were arresting people in such a mass that it couldn't fit in the police vans or cars. So they had commandeered the MTA. That's our bus system. So they were deciding they were going to use the B44, which is our bus here, to transfer people downtown to jail. And we look up in one moment and notice that the buses aren't moving, right? And we notice, I start to cry, that the bus drivers have stepped off the buses. And in a matter of a day, their union, they huddled up, they're on text message, they're doing their own conference call. These are our bus drivers. And they said, we do not work for the NYPD. We carry working New Yorkers to and from their homes and jobs safely, and we will not be used to squash their civil liberties. It was a short tweet from a transit union that made us all burst into tears, right? They could not arrest us. Because all along the chain of oppression, when someone steps and stands in their power and they say, I refuse to be a cog in this system, the whole thing falls apart. They had to let everybody go. There were no bus. They can't drive a bus. They can't drive the B44. But that was activism. And then you saw Minneapolis bus union tweeted the same thing, and then Oakland. So they're talking across the country that they will not allow public transportation to be used to squash the civil liberties of the people who they feel that they are supposed to serve in their cities. So that to me highlights exactly what Brittany is saying. You could be working sanitation, you could be a teacher, maybe you're a nurse. There's all different ways that you can stand in your power and disrupt the criminal legal system, the policing of Black bodies, the killing of our civil liberties.
And I agree. I when I was a kid, right, it was like my mom would send me to the store to buy something, and sometimes I would take the change and buy something that I wanted. But if I came home with the wrong thing, I knew my mom was going to lay into me. And this goes back to what Brittany and you were saying. Like, this is our money, right? Like, they keep coming back from the store with the wrong thing. We keep sending them to buy some safety for our communities, and they keep coming back with some white dudes with guns and some tanks and body armor.
Community
And we're like,
basketball
nice.
game.
Yeah.
We told you to bring some
Helicopters,
safety to our
drones.
community. But we think of the government, quote unquote, as a separate entity from us. That's our money. We're sending them to the store with our money to get us a thing that we want, and they're coming back with something different. And again, it's up to us to say, no, you keep coming back. We're going to stop sending you to the store now, right?
Mhm.
And you ain't going to have no change to get no candy because your police union keeps getting tanks instead of some safety, some basketball games, some community centers. And that's how we have to look at budgets. That's how we have to look at who are appointed to these commissions that oversee our police officers. It's not a government appointing people and a government putting in place. It's all of us, and all of our money should be fighting those police unions. All of our money, because it's our money, right? And
Mm-hmm.
what we saw back in Ferguson is it was disproportionately our money, right? We are the ones who are paying the tickets and paying the fines and being stopped and paying cash bails, and white people are get out of jail free card. That is research and proven that Black people and people of color pay more for the same crimes to get out of, just for bail, for cash bail, right? Which is unconstitutional. And we're seeing cities move to cashless bail systems and consider what they were supposed to consider from the beginning constitutionally, which is the likelihood that they'll commit a crime while they're out or that they'll flee. Those are the only two things that a judge is supposed to consider when setting bail. But we've just accepted this condition that, oh, if he may have robbed a liquor store, that's worse than somebody who keyed a car. No, it's like the only thing that should be considered is if they're going to flee or if they're going to hurt somebody when they're out. And taking ownership in those systems, because ultimately, I think we can convince people if they realize, oh, the government isn't putting those people in jail. We are, by our inaction, by us not fighting those police unions. We are being kind of complicit in that action and not dismantling the system that we've seen doesn't work. So this is going to be our final question. If we dismantled the police or the criminal justice system, how and this you can take as long as you want to, what do you imagine that looking like at the other side of this struggle?
Dr. Cornel West says that justice is what love looks like in public. And Dr. King reminds us that love on its own can be seen as sentimental and anemic, but love combined with power can actually correct everything that stands in the way of love. And I think that those two things combined, they sound soft, they sound meaningless, they don't sound like hard hitting policy. But I actually want love to be the policy. Like I genuinely mean that, because if that combination of love and power is what is guiding our policy making, then we disabuse ourselves of the notion that there are supposed to be haves and have-nots. And if we disabuse ourselves of the notion that there are supposed to be haves and have-nots, then we can start asking the fundamental questions of what does everybody deserve? Everybody deserves a safe community. Everybody deserves a house that keeps them safe and warm and well. Everybody deserves water that helps them grow and that doesn't make them sick. Everybody deserves to breathe air that helps them grow and that doesn't make them sick. Everybody deserves a school where their needs are met, where they're culturally affirmed, where they're prepared for the world. Everybody deserves a job that pays them not just a living wage, but a livable wage, such that they can afford the things that they need for their family. These are fundamental facts of life that if we actually looked at policy through that prism, we would be having fundamentally different conversations about what safe communities look like. We'd be arguing about the fact that we need more trees, right? Not less. We'd be arguing about the fact that we need more mental health, not less. That we need fewer police officers, not more, if any at all, right? It would fundamentally change the frame of our conversations, change the frame of our demands, and change the frame of the things that we expect for ourselves. We have allowed this country, this Western capitalistic, white dominant culture and society to dictate to us what we should be allowed to have and to commodify things that we should deserve in the first place. The fact that you have to go to the store and buy a bottle of water when clean, healthy water should be free for you to drink because it is in abundance around this world, that shows you just how many tricks this system has played on us about what we fundamentally deserve. So if we approach our demands of our government officials that way, and if our government officials approach writing policy that way, then we are having a fundamentally different conversation and ultimately living in a fundamentally different world. So I know that sounds soft, but I'm being very serious that we should be creating policy and running our politics based on the idea not of who has what and who deserves what, but the fact that everybody deserves access to a full and equal liberated life. And if we write all of our policy in that frame of reference, then we won't have to worry about the rest of this stuff.
We have to ask ourselves, why are the demands that Brittany laid out so threatening? You know, we heard it laid out. Why is that so dangerous? And we know it is because if we look back, you know, I'm a daughter of a former Black Panther. And if you look at the Black Panther 10-point program and what Brittany laid out, our community's activists have laid this map out for decades. And what did they get in return? A lot of people don't know, but we have political prisoners in the United States. There are former Black Panthers that are still incarcerated. Everyone knows Assata Shakur because we chant her at our rallies, but her co-defendants are still in prison. The people incarcerated for liberating her from prison are still in prison. And this was their platform: food, water, safe housing, like all the things that we say, oh, it sounds, you know, like whatever. But this is exactly what revolutionaries were demanding in the 60s and 70s that are still being punished for those demands. So we have to ask ourselves, wow, what is so threatening about Black people having full access to not just survive, but to thrive, right? And what kind of threat does it impose on the systems that she laid out? Capitalism, white supremacy, those things cannot exist if we have all the things we need to live. There is we have to approach this understanding that we're talking about some dangerous stuff because it threatens the foundation of the very thing that oppresses us, even though it sounds like something everybody should want. Everybody should be able to get health care when they need it. You should be able to get water out your faucet that's not poison, right? So why is it so hard to get that? And why is demanding that such a threat? So, you know, I just +1 everything she said, but I really lean into everyone and say, we've got to approach these demands like the threats that they are. And we have to flank our organizations and our activists in a way that this is really our path to some new freedom that we haven't yet to envision or yet to imagine. And that it's not brand new, that it's centuries old, you know, that Harriet Tubman imagined these things that Brittany laid out. So we are just carrying this torch. But we're going to win.
That's right.
Well, I want to thank you guys for spending this time and educating people. And I want to close by saying that, it is possible. I would have to admit that, like, everything that we said here today is wrong, but there's only one thing that we know. The way that it is now is, we know that 100% is wrong. We know it doesn't work. And the question then is, why are we not changing it? And thank you for coming to this episode of the Root Institute. And make sure you check out some of our other videos and some of our other classes. Thank you.